Hi, welcome to Race Sensation. I am your host, Dan, and in this episode, we are going to be looking at Atlas Comics Library number 3 in the Days of the Rockets. And this is part of Fantagraphics' ongoing series republishing Marvel Comics titles. Now, Marvel Comics started off, the publisher name was Timely. They were publishing a lot of different things. To my interest, I'm mostly interested in the pulps they were doing, and then the comics under the Timely label. Then for a short time they rebranded as Atlas, and then they became Marvel Comics. And so this, a lot of the early Timely stuff is like the Captain America, the Namor, the original Torch. So those things that were being heavily reprinted, the Atlas comics were not being reprinted as much. And so Fantagraphics has licensed this, and they're putting these out. And there is a surprising amount of really good material that was produced in a short time. Like I said, there's my favorite of the reissues so far was Joe Maneely got an artist edition. I have a video out on that. That's a big oversized thing showing off his wonderful artwork. And this is following in the footsteps of the a book covering horror and a book covering the Venus, which was fantasy and then became a horror title. So this is the third one. And it's covering, as you could probably guess, sci-fi titles. So, really nice binding, really great looking book. And as we can see here, Atlas Comics Library number 3 in the Days of the Rockets. And then for some reason, they feel the need to put in starring Jet Dixon and Speed Carter, which I'm not sure how many people actually, even who are fans of these comics, are fans of those characters. I don't know. Honestly, I am not that. This is the part of, besides the romance, this is the side of the Marvel Comics that I know the least about. And, sci-fi, this was before my time. It's also not stuff that was reprinted very much. I was a kid in the 60s. I grew up with Spider-Man and Fantastic Four, Kirby and Ditko stuff, and horror comics. I mean, I liked horror comics at the time. Anything with a monster, good stuff. But I wasn't really a science fiction guy, except when they had monsters. So I'm not that I wasn't that familiar with this. I just bought it last night. I rushed home to look at it and realized one of the pages is all messed up, so I'm going to have to take it back. And I really haven't had a chance to read it or even absorb it that much, but I do know that there's a lot of people who are always anxiously waiting to find out how the reproduction is in these books and give a little bit of an idea about what the stories are in here. So that's all this is. I'm not an authority on these things, on these sci-fi comics. And but let's go through this. This is comprising the complete 6-issue run of Space Squadron, which was renamed, I think, for just one issue, Space Worlds. And that ran from June 1951 to April 1952. And the complete 6-issue run of Speed Carter, Spaceman, July 1953 and January 1954. And they give a good rundown here. They mostly, because none of these things had credits on them, people can give the artist credit because they can usually tell who the artist is. It's a little easier here. There wasn't quite as much workshopping. There wasn't, in some of the studios, so many different hands would be on a comic. It's kind of hard to tell who did some of them. These are pretty straightforward. There's only a couple that seem to have a couple artists on it. But you'll recognize, a lot of these people were with Timely. They were there at Atlas, and some of them went on to Marvel. So you'll recognize a lot of these names, I'm sure. George Tuska has a lot of work in here. And that's a guy who sometimes would do when it was came to superheroes books, he would sometimes do fill-in issues or short runs, and because he was taking the place of an artist I probably really liked on a comic I was following, I got to dislike his name. Maybe, now's a good time to reevaluate him since there's a bunch of stuff in here. I don't know that that's fair because a lot of the guys here, this work is rough. It's not going to be what they come up with in the 60s. John Romita, sorry. I don't know why I said that, is in here. Very little, but he's in here. The big thing is there's people like Warner Roth, who I know from, he did all these guys worked up into other comics, but they were not the comics I was following. So I know their names, but I'm not really familiar with them that much. And and there's like George Klein. But the big thing is Alan Bellman is somebody who's got some interesting work in here. But Joe Maneely, who, like I said, has that big artist edition of really great looking stuff. In the second half of the book, when it's covering the Speed Carter, he's got a couple things in this early stuff, but he really has a lot of stuff under the Speed Carter stuff, and it's some really good stuff. So anyway, like I said, there's a lot of people here, and so it's a good overview of some great working cartoonists at the time. Here it starts off. This is the Marvel Pulp magazine, sci-fi pulp magazine, and it's got some Planet stories, which adventure stories, taking place in space or having sci-fi elements. Not a lot of hard science fiction stuff, more like what you would call maybe space operas or something. But I have a compilation of some stories from there. I read it a long time ago, so I'm not really, I'd be hard pressed. I might accidentally say the name of a pulp, of a story from a different pulp collection, so I won't go into that too much. But here's some of the covers for the Space Squadron book, and it's really not a very good shot, but that just tells you how rare behind the scenes shots were. This is the Timely offices on the 14th floor of the Empire State Building in December 16th, 1948. So that gives you a little glimpse behind the scene. Some from artwork from various. So Christopher Rule, he was the top Patsy Walker artist before he was replaced by Al Jaffe. I'm not that familiar with those romance / I guess comedy things, but so Chris has got some stuff in here. But this is a great one. This is there's a couple of these Joe Maneely unused character designs that were done for the Jet Nixon of the Planetary Patrol, and I like seeing these. I like Maneely's artwork in black and white. It's really strong. There's Unknown Worlds. That's one of what I think, besides the EC ones, was probably one of the longer lasting sci-fi comic titles. But even that, horror comics took over that. They started printing horror stories in them as opposed to sci-fi. And this is a Tuska page, and a lot of his forms just look weird to me. But there's another great Maneely one. Now this character, some of these characters that Maneely did, that is just such a goofy, I don't know. Some more Marvel Pulp magazine covers. And then we get into this. Now, I'm going to try not to spend too much time on this. I think you'll get the gist of it pretty quickly. This cover looks good. The first couple of the first half of the book, covering the Space Squadron, is definitely not my cup of tea. The aliens in it barely make any impression. They get a couple panels in each story, and they usually could have been done by an evil Earth guy instead of an alien. This character, I guess his name is Max. I think he's the Martian guy who pops up here in a couple stories. Let's see if I'm remembering well, because I just looked at it last night. So, now here's the thing again about some of these things. The Manili book was published with a slightly, it looked really good. The other titles in this series, this white paper is just so white that it's really distracting from the art. And then when they do things like this, like the word balloons are white, they've made the ceiling white, and then there's all this white border. And to be honest, I don't know that there'd be too much to help a lot of these panels, because they're talking head panels, and the artist has not come up with any great, any interesting ideas for having the characters talking. And then the action is mostly dog fights with spaceships. Again, I've said this in a couple of these videos where I'm talking about these earlier comics. I grew up with the Kirby and Ditko and the people who were coming after that. And, and I guess you got to mostly place it at Kirby's feet, because he's the one who kind of changed the way action flowed in comics. And as a kid, I learned, those really sucked me in. Those comics really sucked me in. It's how I think of, those are more engaging comics to me than some of the earlier ones. That being said, some of this stuff is really good. I think of this before Kirby, although there are some people who have dramatic action, but somebody like in the Prince Valiant strips, Hal Foster is a huge influence on a lot of these artists. But they're more like illustrations. There's a great panel, and occasionally there'd be a flow of panels, but not that often, probably because those were newspapers. But you also don't see it in these comics as much. So, to me, this is not, these are not exciting comics. I do like that guy's face there. I mean, the main thing that makes him an alien is he's got fangs and crazy eyebrows. There's a couple things here. There are some really good colors in this, but overall, because of the white, the brightness of the white of the page, I just find that a little distracting. So I'm going to flip through here a little bit. I think this is Max. I think this is the good Martian, but it's hard to tell because he looks like the bad ones. Or no, this isn't Max. Yes, it is. It's Max. That's him. So he's the good Martian, and the rest of them are bad. You know how Martians be. Great cover. Nothing as cool as that. The inside art is just not. I mean, that's a fun drawing, but I don't find it. I can't say that it really sucks me into the action. I did find this one interesting. This the Space Squadron goes up against the Vulturos of space. It reminds me of that, and this is before. This takes place before this movie was filmed, but there's a really early science fiction movie about a giant behemoth from outer space kind of thing. And when you finally see the thing, everybody keeps saying it's as big as a battleship, and it's a marionette of the goofiest looking monster puppet you've ever seen. If you've never seen the giant claw, you should check it out on YouTube or something. But that's what this reminds me of. These monsters actually look a little bit better. than that. They're not as big though. There were a couple pages. There was a couple things I was going to point out. Again, there's a good. That looks like it's going to be some exciting two-headed Martian action. They're olive green on the cover. They're flesh toned inside. This one's good. There's a good head and there's a bad head. So when the good head's awake, he's okay to be around. But when the evil head wakes up, so Space Squadron. I like the evil octopuses with beaks that look like that are on the front of their faces. So there's a little bit of monsters there. And here's the space demons. And they're more like gremlins than demons, but and now see, here's like I said, there is some good color work here. I really like these. Some of these panels work really well. And so there's a lot of fun stuff. Look at that. That's great. There's some good stuff in here. There's just a lot of stuff near the beginning that's not that interesting to me. Now we're getting into monster territory. Oh, and I like the way they do the flames in this is pretty cool. The flame hands. That's good stuff. That's a great looking cover for the monster. This is, I just said his name earlier. God, what is this guy's name? This is one of those guys where I knew the name, but I did not know what I was going to see as far as art goes. So that's 120. And this is the Alan Bellman stuff. And there are some really funky faces in his work. I mean, look at the way that is. And this one's got some. This is him too. This is I like the way these the plant monsters. I like the way their roots look when they're acting like hands. And look at that. That's pretty cool. Or their branches. Whichever part they're using. And the bad guy who was controlling them gets his comeuppance, of course. Last reverse. And now here we're getting into some. Now we're getting into a lot more monster stuff. As monsters start taking over comics. This I thought was this monster really this dark? Did it really look like that in the comic? You can barely see him in any of the panels. I mean, that looks cool. I just wondered if it was really that dark. Oh, and here's the page that's messed up. See? That's what happens when you go in, you grab something you've ordered, and run out the door. So I'll be taking this back to return it and get another one. That page is really messed up. And I will return it, no problem. Get myself a better one. Okay, I'm taking too long. I'm flying through too much of this. I want to get... here we go. Here's where we get into the... there's that great cover. The Manili stuff and some of the... Suddenly, in these issues, the aliens are all over the place. You get to see them a lot. They have a lot to do. They're weird looking. I like these machines. There's some great robots in some of these. And, there's some great panels. So, again, Manili is, you know, he's really influenced by these, by the illustrative kind of guys, like Hal Foster, etc. And he's good enough to pull it off. So you know, he makes this stuff interesting. You know, people are talking in his comics, but it's not boring. And more, you know, he has people doing stuff while they're talking, at least most of the time. See, these are great robots too. Those are cool. Some great aliens. The stories are usually, you know, they're very, very, you know, slim. But what are you going to do with, you know, some of these stories are only 3 pages long, and you know, a really long one in here is probably 8 pages. It looks like. Well, there was a couple early on that seemed longer, but it might have just seemed longer because they were boring. But this, I mean, that's a great robot. That's such a good robot there. So, wow, nice. Another great monster. Oh, and this one obviously is like, hey, let's make this a little more monster. Because there we have skeletons digging up coffins. So, like I said, I was a little bit worried when I was going through the earlier comics, even though I knew this was coming up, the better stuff was coming up. I was still a little bit worried. I actually am glad I've got this. It's a type of comic. You know, this is a certain time period of the sci-fi comics I wasn't that familiar with. Yeah, there are some pages I wasn't that interested in. But there are plenty of fun pages, some interesting artwork, some early artwork by some artists. And, you know, like I said, Joe Manili makes it all worthwhile. There's that Tuska. They had that earlier, the black and white, the original artwork for it. But that, I don't know, that just seems really off to me. Another cool monster. So there's a look at that. Oh, at the end they have little profiles of all the creators. I think the biggest one is for Tuska, George Tuska. But I think this is a fun book. I think I've given you enough that you can tell whether or not you want this one, and I know that's a lot of people are interested in that. So thanks for watching. Please hit like, follow, subscribe, whatever, you know, and please share if you liked it and if you think someone else would.